we are in a pretty quiet pattern, so I wanted to take a look at the first winter discussion for this year. I typically each fall or late summer time frame, I typically make about three discussions about the winter, and then I start releasing my first winter forecast. But that won't be until we get to about Halloween time or so. That is when I will begin to release my first winter forecast. So I will have a discussion in this video, and then I'll have another discussion in a couple weeks, then another discussion as we move into early September before we start taking an actual forecast look at the winter time frame. So in these videos, you can plan on a lot of ensemble model guidance, long range data, and all different scenarios that could happen for this winter time frame. But again, this is not a forecast or a prediction, as it is way too early for that. Yeah, it is just model input or output, and then I'll look at all the upper air patterns that may evolve through this winter time frame that could allow for a lot of cold air, a very warm air, snowy, dry. It's all of the above, I guess. So this is a look at the upper air pattern for December. We see in the blue colors a lot of troughing showing up into the Gulf of Alaska. This is a lot of troughing over here with some ridging showing up into northeast Canada or into eastern Canada, with some troughing showing up in the southern portions of the country. This leans heavily more of a El Nino type of pattern, which will be in this winter, that I will talk about on this video as well. But this pattern right here would allow for a lot of cold air to spill into the western portions of the country and down into the southern portions of the country as well, with more of a maybe some sort of ridging pattern up into the upper Midwest into Canada. But again, it all depends on the exact placement of the troughing and the ridging, as it is early yet. But this would have a pretty decent look for a pretty active pattern in the country in December, but with below average temperatures likely staying south of the Midwest for the most part, or at least upper Midwest will likely be on the warmer side as well, but it depends on that. And then taking a look at January, an even more interesting look on the European seasonal guidance. It has a lot of troughing into the Gulf of Alaska, or into the eastern Pacific Ocean, with troughing expanding through much of the southern half of the country, but with continued ridging up into Canada in them areas, maybe spilling down into portions of the upper Midwest and northeast of the country. But again, a lot of cold air spilling down into the United States would be likely with this troughing type of upper air pattern. But with that ridging up north, that may be able to disrupt the polar vortex as we move to December, January time frame. That would allow for areas of Arctic blast potentially, but again, way too early to know about that stuff. It's just a possible outcome as we get into later December and into January, when you have this much ridging showing up in Canada, that can maybe allow for maybe stratospheric warming event to take place, which puts a lot of cold air out of the polar region and down into the lower 48. At the surface, this would allow for, again, above average temperatures into the upper Midwest because of that ridging, and up into Canada, with normal to below average temperatures further south. And this model usually has a warm bias, it always does. As we went to January now, it has a pretty cool temperatures for the southeast and into the plains areas, with above average temperatures for further northeast into the Great Lakes region, with that ridging pushing a little bit further northeast. But again, a ton of troughing further south would allow for quite a bit of cold air to spill into a pretty large portion of the country in January time frame, which it would be below average temperatures for even the coldest time frame of the year. So pretty interesting look there. Now I have pretty high confidence that we may have a pretty wet winter. This is a look at January, above average precipitation for quite a bit of the country, really, including the Midwest areas, and then into the Northeast as well. For December, it's above average precipitation as well for the Northeast and the Southeast. Pretty likely, I guess, to happen. I really see a pretty wet winter, a pretty active winter ahead. That does not mean above average snowfall by any means, but it means it should be above average for precipitation, with rain, snow, sleet, any of that stuff. The Kansas model has a pretty similar look overall as well for December. Pretty active, southern portion of the country into the East Coast area, In January, pretty active as well for the southern portions of the plains and down to the eastern portions of the country. February, pretty active again. So, again, pretty active overall, it seems, for temperatures. This is a look at December. You know, more potentially a reasonable look for December. January, again, pretty similar to December, and February, even colder for the middle of the country. Really, I'm not exactly sure about this, but again, just potential outcomes from model guidance as well. But again, so in the country somewhere, there'll likely be below average temperatures into the country, but there may be above average temperatures as well, likely for the upper Midwest into eastern portions of the country. Seems most likely outcome as of now. I do see for above average temperatures this winter, but again, there will likely be several Arctic blasts as we move deeper into the winter time frame, especially with all that ridging coming up into Canada. This is a look at a different model for November to January time frame. This has below average temperatures for the southern plains, but above average temperatures for quite a bit of the country overall. This model usually has a very warm bias nationwide. I mean, even across the globe, it has the above average temperatures. But again, this does at least have some sort of average to below average temperatures for the country. A pretty interesting look from this model. Taking a look at the precipitation, very active southern portions of the country, very very El Nino driven. Pretty dry areas into the Midwest, the northwest portions of the country as well. So again, a pretty split, for above average and below average precipitation into the country. Dry northern half, very wet the southern half from this model as well. So now taking a look at the Enzo region, we are in El Nino, a pretty strong El Nino now it seems, and we will be in an El Nino throughout the entire winter time frame and into the early spring time frame as well. These are the chances of an El Nino, and they're as high as they can be through the winter time frame and into early springtime as well. This is a look at a bunch of different model guidance as for the summer, January, February time frame, which is about right here. Again, every model guidance is in at least a moderate to strong El Nino, and it seems that we'll likely be in the El Nino on a bunch of model guidance through at least late spring time frame next year. So very high confidence in this El Nino, which can drive the winter pattern. And El Nino typically brings the above average temperatures for the north in the country, below average temperatures for the south in the country, with a wetter pattern in a lot of areas. Last time we had a pretty strong El Nino, that was 2 or 3 winters ago, I think. It was definitely very warm, like top 5 warmest winter overall in the Midwest. Very low lake effect snowfall totals, but there were a couple of big winter storms in the Midwest because a lot more moisture is for an El Nino. There's a couple of big winter storms in the Midwest. Iowa had like a foot of snow, foot and a half of snow once or twice, but again, it didn't last long because it was pretty warm throughout the winter. But the polar vortex is a huge thing as well, which I don't have a lot to show about that on this video. But the polar vortex drives the winter pattern so much. It can drive the lead, I guess, for driving a winter pattern. And we don't have any idea on what's going to happen this winter with that for months yet. Okay, because if the polar vortex gets disrupted, who knows if it'll be in the lower 48 or if it'll be on the other side of the globe. That's like gambling. Or if the polar vortex even disrupts at all, we're not sure if there'll be a strong, polar vortex anyways that keeps all the cold air up north, or if it'll be weaker, putting all the cold air further down into the United States. So that is a huge thing to the winter forecasting as well, and that is the wild card that I was talking about, because you can forecast a well below average winter for temperatures, but then the polar vortex, stays strong up north, and we don't get Arctic air to get them, below average temperatures to happen often. Or there's times where you can forecast a well above average winter for temperatures. Like last year, I mean, I didn't, but some people did, and we had that polar vortex disrupted a couple of times with a stratospheric warming event, and that allowed for several Arctic blasts to the winter time frame, bringing below average temperatures overall for some of the Midwest, not all the Midwest, but some of the Midwest overall. Anyways, but again, a lot of cold air can allow for a pretty dry pattern too. So if you want a snowy winter, you don't want a very cold winter. You want more of a normal winter, I guess, to get them big storms to happen easier into the Midwest rather than further south. And obviously, for lake effect snow, though, you do want them Arctic fronts to move through to bring them northwest wind. So it's just really the opinions here. I guess matters for the winter time frame of what you want. But there's a lot that needs to be unfolded over the next couple months, and we will have another video like this updated in a few weeks or so.